take some photos of video. And it was a chaotic scene. Yeah, they had attacked in central Beirut, and it's still ongoing while we're recording this.
You're watching CineD, supported by B&H and CVP.
All right, welcome to the channel, Timothy Wolfer. Timothy, you're a freelance cinematographer and photographer, and you're currently in Beirut amidst a ongoing conflict between Iranian-backed proxies and Israel. First, I just wanted to start with, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Each day is its own experience, but for the most part, I've been able to get out there and capture this story as I'm seeing it.
So, I described you as a freelance photographer and cinematographer. Is that how you identify too? Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I think so. I would add to that like a freelance journalist. I think that, documentary film, at least the way that I've done them in the past, has always been an act of journalism. So that's the way I see it.
Can you tell me a little bit about your decision to go to what really is, an active war zone, or at least sort of headed that direction?
I decided to come because covering issues of mostly migration and refugees is something that I've always been interested in and passionate about telling stories of. And unfortunately, one of the things that war brings is a lot of people that are displaced. And so trying to find those human stories and to allow them just to have a platform to tell their own stories. That's kind of what I'm always trying to do with my filmmaking and journalism.
I also want to be careful here because, I don't want to sort of tell the story that this is kind of an easy thing. I mean, obviously you have training to do something like this, right? Can you go into a little bit of your background beyond being a documentary filmmaker, working in high-risk situations? I know you were in Ukraine during the invasion there. You were in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Can you talk a little bit about the safety side training that you have for something like this beyond being an incredible photographer and cinematographer?
So the training that I've gotten over the years has been mostly a lot of it is experience and working my way up to being able to do things like this. So starting out small, traveling domestically around the US, going to hurricanes aftermath and stuff like that. And then the first real experience I had like this was in 2010 after the Haiti earthquake. I hitchhiked in about 4 days afterwards and put together a film about the orphan evacuations. So the State Department was working on getting all these children evacuated to the United States. And so I kind of followed the story of them trying to get to the airport and then get onto these C-17s. And then we find out that a lot of these orphans had parents that were still alive. And so going into the ethical issues of that. From that experience, I was able to put together, my first feature film. And I distributed it at the time on Hulu, which was kind of a new website. It's no longer there because that was, 14 years ago or so. And that kind of gave me the foot into what I kind of wanted to do, was finding those kinds of stories and linking them to the news, but then also looking for the deeper issue there.
Can you tell me a little bit about just how you work? I mean, I'd love to know, what do you have in your kit? Do you have local support? How are you sourcing these stories without going into any detail, obviously?
I have my kit sorted and always ready to roll. So, I have my cameras set up, my microphones, the normal filmmaking equipment, but then I also have my personal safety equipment. Obviously, we're in a war zone, so I have a bulletproof vest and helmets. And I always bring 2 sets of those so that if I hire a fixer or something like that, that they can also be protected. So I have all of that kit I bring as well. And then what I do is when I get to one of these locations, I start slowly. I find a safe place to stay. I make sure I'm feeling comfortable. I don't go out just filming immediately. Find a good translator, driver, whatever those aspects I need are. Get the proper documentations from local authorities and stuff like that, because that's also very important. And then I go out and start looking for stories. And when looking for the stories, I'm always trying to be as honest as I can with the people I'm meeting and saying, hey, here's my intentions, here's what I want to do with your story, and here's how I plan to get it out there. And a lot of people will say no, and some people will say yes, and that's just how I go about it.
Now, I know in the past you've freelanced for various organizations, different networks, different newspapers, with different wire services. How is that sort of working for you in Beirut?
Yeah, so I've been working for a wire service and publishing photos through them. And then I've also been collecting video that I will eventually, put out some short documentaries or so with, and kind of twofold there. So uh, both video and photos, and trying to balance those two aspects.
When I've done projects in the past in areas that are controlled by sort of different groups with sometimes conflicting ideologies, I always try to be on the right side of them too. Have you told all of the factions kind of that you're here and what you're up to? Do you know what I mean? Are they aware that you're here? Does the State Department understand? Do the Israelis know? Or you don't want to get into that?
I don't know if the Americans know if I'm here or not. I guess they would, because they saw that I bought a plane ticket. Whenever you get to a country or whatever you're doing, you should be as honest as possible, I think. So yeah, I definitely went to the Ministry of Information and all the proper authorities here in Lebanon and let them know that I was here. And when I do show up to take photos or video, I check in with the local authorities or whoever it may be before I start filming and taking photos. Is just the ethical thing to do, I think.
So early on, you mentioned you were interested with, especially with migration, refugees. That's a topic that you've been following for a long time. I guess I should disclose, we worked on a film together called The Right Girls. You mentioned ethics as well early on, and this is a question that I think a lot of people have for freelancers in your position. You're trying to cover something where people's lives are very often at risk. How do you balance, covering the story versus helping someone who's right in front of you that might be hurt or injured? I mean, this is kind of a classic ethical question that we talk about all the time. Where's the line for you, Timothy?
Ooh, that's a good question, Graham. Yeah, so let's take it to the extreme. If somebody was in front of you and they were, bleeding out, I feel you have the ethical responsibility to set your camera down and help them out. Now, backing up a step, if somebody is, I don't know, hungry or something like that, I know a lot of journalists struggle with that too. Is like, is it okay to, provide food or water or something like that? And each situation you have to judge and try and use your humanity, but also not influence the story, because you're there to just be an observer or to try to observe and share what's actually happening. And so it's a tough balance.
As a documentary filmmaker myself, one of the things that's been interesting to see from a technology perspective is as cameras have gotten smaller, I've felt like I'm more of a fly on the wall, because you alluded to that when a camera's there, I'm trying so hard not to make the situation different. How do you wrestle with that? So you bring a camera into a situation where it's very clear that one side wants to get their message out, and it's a very specific one-sided message. Do you know the question I'm asking? It's a tricky one, and I wrestle with this a lot too. You have a camera, they know you have the ability to get an audience for whatever it is that they're saying. How do you balance that particular conundrum?
I don't know, because like at the end of the day, you do kind of become part of the situation when you have a camera. I mean, if you're filming people walking down the street, obviously they probably will never even notice that you're there. Maybe they will, but you aren't really influencing the story. But if you start asking them questions and now they're late to their meeting or something like that, now you're influencing the situation or their situation. You've interrupted it. And, just playing that out, like The Right Girls, the film you and I worked on, I was definitely there with them through their journeys. So the film, follows four transgender women across Mexico as they try and seek asylum in the United States. and I'm there and almost like their therapists. They're sitting there talking to the camera all day long. So that definitely had an influence on the situation. To say it was just a fly on the wall, I just don't know if that's even possible in this day and age. I think that documentary is that balance of how do you do that? I don't know. It's a good question.
Can you tell me about some of the scenes that you've covered while being in Beirut?
Few times I've been able to go out to where the Israeli airstrikes have been. They've done press tours, and so I've been able to see the damage from the strikes. I've also gone out to the border, which is more my interest area, and seen people crossing from Lebanon into Syria. A lot of them were Syrian refugees that had come to Lebanon after their war and are now headed home because it's gotten too dangerous for them here in Lebanon. And then I've been able to visit a couple of schools where people are seeking refuge right now because they've been forced to flee southern Lebanon. So the Israelis are pushing everybody north in the country.
I guess following up with that first scene that you mentioned, I guess we'd call it a couple of different moments where there's been an Israeli airstrike. When you're in a moment like that, do you have a fair amount of skepticism about what you're being told? How do you kind of walk that line, or you take it at face value, or you just record what's there because you're not an analyst of debris? How do you kind of walk that line?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for the kinds of videos and photos that I've been taking, you basically just take the photo and video and say this was an Israeli airstrike, which we know to be true. And so I just keep it at that. Here's the location, here's when it happened, here's what they say, this is how many people they say died. And, let history play out and see what actually happened.
So when you're walking in to any kind of scene, are you methodically working through coverage? Are you going right to the center? Are you staying around the edges, grabbing wide shots first, then trying to find out who the key players are, then move in? Let's say this is a less orchestrated, press visit and more like you on your own, you're walking into a situation. How do you sort of approach that? Is it different every time?
Yeah, I'd say it's different every time, but I do have patterns. First of all, I just show up and I wait and I just kind of like feel it up, see, are people going to be comfortable with their pictures being taken? Kind of what's the protocol here? And then from there, yeah, I start with wide shots and then I work my way in, maybe walk around. And then the best part is I go up and just start talking to people. And like for all the photos and video I take, I probably spend 10 times the amount of time just standing around talking with people, which is maybe the best part is learning their stories and getting to know them and where they're coming from and what they've been through, unfortunately, in this situation. So I do that. And then, if they'll allow me to interview them, great. If not, move on and meet some other people.
So just to let people in on a conversation we had over WhatsApp off camera, you were sitting in your hotel and did you heard an airstrike or someone reported to you and then you went to the scene? Is that sort of how the coverage has gone most often in Beirut? And I understand this was in the city center. I guess let's dive a little more specific into that instance, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So you and I were about to sit down and do this. I had the tripod and the camera all set up here in the hotel, and I got information through several groups I'm a part of saying that there had just been a strike. And so I called my fixer and I've said, hey, is this in an area we could safely go to? And he thought it was. You really have to build this rapport. I just can't emphasize this if people do this kind of work, is that you need to build a rapport with that fixer, that they trust you, that you're not going to do something stupid that is going to get them in trouble. Because after I leave, he's still going to be here and he's going to have to deal with the repercussions of the stupidity of what I did. And so he said, yeah, I think that we can do this safely. So he came and picked me up and we drove to the scene, and he talked with the military and they were like, yeah, you guys can go, take some photos and video. And it was a chaotic scene. Yeah. They had attacked in central Beirut, and it's still ongoing while we're recording this. The latest numbers I'm seeing in the news is 22 people died. When I was there, they were saying 6. So it's quickly going up. And yeah, and so took some photos and video, and then left.
how's the communication been with your family? Because I just know I've been in situations where my communication has been cut off in the middle of a thing, and I want to check in, and that's always in the back of my head, and I'm in a potentially dangerous situation, not a war zone like you, but these are things that I wrestle with. So I'm just curious, how are things going with you on that front?
So far they're fine. My family has come to expect this from me. So, I know they worry and they love me lots. They probably wish I would have maybe picked a different career, although I don't know.
But they understand. Do they
But
understand? I mean, you got to them to the point where they're like, no, this is what I am passionate about.
yeah, I think so. And I think that familial support has been critical for me. I know my dad, especially when I was younger, would get phone calls in the middle of the night, like, "Ah, crap, I really need some help right now," and he would sort it out and figure out what to do to help me out in that situation. I don't think he would appreciate those calls at this point in my career, but have been incredibly supportive and understand that this is what I want to do.
So why do you think displaced people have been such a focus of your career?
So I grew up in a university town, and growing up, my friends were from all over the world. So it was a very international university. So I started traveling and I started working for several NGOs, and they were working in migration. And one of the things that I've noticed a pattern that I'm always interested in and wanting to report on is that when people move, they there is this thing where the society they move into others them. So they're like, oh, these people are coming in to take our jobs to, I mean, in the US, we know all the political rhetoric on the border with Mexico, but that's hardly ever been the truth. So I'm always curious to take that rhetoric, listen to it, and then be like, is that true? Let's go find out and ask those questions, because maybe it is, but it's never been the case that I've discovered. And so just being able to share those stories and look for that uh, has captured my curiosity and been something I want to do.
Please stay safe. I know it's sort of a quickly developing situation. Hopefully by the time this is edited, you're going to be getting close to getting back on a plane. But, I know you have the background to do this. And I'm always just very impressed with your work. Can you tell folks what your Instagram handle is so that they can follow some of the content you're putting out?
Yeah. So my Instagram is at Tim Wolfer.
All right. Timothy Walfer, thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of your evening.